Mixtón War or Mixtón Rebellion. In the years 1540-1542, the Caxcan people of northwest Mexico rebelled against the Spanish invaders in the Mixtón War. Mixtón, a hill in Zacatecas that was once an indigenous stronghold, inspired the name of the war, the Canes, the native populations in the region where the Mixtón War took place. The Caxcanes were the heart and soul of the resistance, despite the fact that other native tribes engaged in combat with the Spanish during the Mixtón War. The Caxcanes inhabited the southern regions of Zacatecas and Aguascalientes, as well as the northern portion of the modern Mexican state of Jalisco. They are frequently referred to as being a part of the Chichimeca, a term used by the Spaniards and Aztecs to refer to all Native Americans who lived in the northern Mexican deserts and were semi-nomadic or nomadic. On the other hand, it appears that the Caxcanes were sedentary, residing in permanent towns and settlements and relying on agriculture for their subsistence. They were among the agricultural, city-dwelling peoples of interior Mexico who were possibly the most northerly. It is thought that the Caxcanes spoke an Uto-Aztecan language. The Zacatecos from the state of the same name were among the other Native Americans taking part in the uprising. Nuño Beltrán de Guzmán marched through Nayarit, Jalisco, Durango, Sinaloa, and Zacatecas in 1529 with 300 to 400 Spaniards and 5,000 to 8,000 Aztec and Tlaxcalan allies, marking the first encounter between the Spanish and the Caxcanes and other indigenous peoples of northwest Mexico. Guzmán, who was vicious even by the standards of the time, killed, tortured, and sold thousands of native people into slavery over a 6-year period. Terrorized the natives with often unprovoked killing, torture, and enslavement was Guzmán's stated policy. In the area known as Nueva Galicia, Guzmán and his lieutenants established towns and Spanish settlements, including Guadalajara, in or close to the Caxcanes' ancestral home. However, as they ventured farther from the intricately structured societies of Central America and tried to compel the indigenous people into servitude via the encomienda system, they met with a growing amount of opposition. Perhaps encouraged by the knowledge that Governor Francisco Vázquez de Coronado had brought more than 1,600 Spaniards and native allies from the area northward with him on his expedition to what would become the American Southwest, the Caxcanes and their allies retaliated in the spring of 1540. Thus, many of the province's most capable soldiers were absent. It appears that the arrest of 18 insurgent indigenous leaders and the hanging of 9 of them in the middle of 1540 ignited the war. The encomendero, Juan de Arce, was killed, roasted, and eaten by the natives later that year. It was also discovered by Spanish authorities that the indigenous people were engaging in devilish dances. Many Aboriginal people left the encomiendas and sought safety in the mountains, particularly in the hill fortress of Mixtón, after killing 2 Catholic priests. A Spanish and native force was led by acting Governor Cristobal de Oñate to put an end to the uprising. 10 Spanish soldiers and a priest were killed by the Caxcans. Oñate made an attempt to storm Mixtón, but was repelled by the locals atop the peak. Oñate then sent a request for reinforcements to Mexico City, the nation's capital. Although the Caxcanes' hierarchical structure is unknown, Tenamastl of Nochistlán, Zacatecas, emerged as their most notable leader. Pedro de Alvarado, an experienced conquistador, was called upon by Viceroy Antonio de Mendoza to help put an end to the uprising. In June of 1541, Alvarado attacked Mixtón with 400 Spaniards and an unspecified number of native allies, refusing to wait for reinforcements. There, he was greeted by roughly 15,000 Aboriginal people led by Tenamastl and Don Diego, a Zacateco. Several native allies and 10 Spanish soldiers were slain in the first Spanish attack's failure. Alvarado made more unsuccessful attempts at attacking, and on June 24th, he was hurt when a horse fell on him. On July 4th, he passed away. The indigenous, emboldened, attempted to storm Guadalajara in September, but were driven back. The native army withdrew to Nochistlán and nearby strongholds. Now deeply concerned, the Spanish authorities feared that the uprising would spread. Under Viceroy Antonio de Mendoza, they raised a force of 450 Spaniards and between 30,000 and 60,000 Aztec, Tlaxcalan, and other native people, and they invaded the Caxcanes' territory. Mendoza waged a war of no quarter, destroying the native strongholds one by one with his overwhelming force. He took control of Tenamzastle and Nochislan on November 9, 1541, but the native chief eventually managed to flee. Up until 1550, Tenamastl would continue to operate as a guerrilla. The rebellion ended when the Spaniards took control of Mixtón's stronghold at the beginning of 1542. Following the defeat of the indigenous people, thousands were dragged off in chains to the mines, and many of the survivors, mostly women and children, were transported from their homelands to work on Spanish farms and haciendas. Many of those captured following Mixtón's fall were executed by cannon fire, some by being ripped apart by dogs and others by stabbing at the viceroy's order. The Council of the Indies launched a covert investigation into the viceroy's behavior in response to reports of the extreme violence. According to one authority, Cortés's two-year victory over the Aztecs created an illusion of European superiority over the Indian as a warrior. Nevertheless, the conquests that the Spanish achieved over the Aztecs and other intricate societies turned out to be merely an introduction to a considerably more extended military conflict against the strange and horrifying abilities of Native American warriors. The Spanish were able to seize control of the area that was home to Guadalajara, the second biggest city in Mexico, which was located in Jalisco after winning the Mixtón War. Additionally, it provided Spanish explorers with access to the northern deserts, where they would look for and discover abundant silver deposits. The Caxcans lost their identity as a distinct people after being assimilated into Spanish society following their defeat. Later on, they would support Spanish soldiers as they continued to advance north. Following the Mixtón War, Spanish expansion resulted in the longer and even bloodier Chichimeca War, 1550 to 1590. After centuries of forced subjugation, the Spanish were compelled to shift their policy from one of accommodating and gradual absorption of the native population. As the Tastuan people, the Caxcans may continue to exist into the 21st century, at least during folk festivals. The Mixtón War is commemorated annually by the Tastuanes in towns like Moyahua de Estrada and Apazol, Zacatecas.